along with Toronto and Vancouver, fill the top 3 positions for the lowest homicide rate, and they have the best and lowest income inequality results. As the report suggests, quality of life is a key factor in reinforcing a city's role as an economic locomotive, improving its attractiveness to further entice companies, talent, and immigrants that will ensure and continue its growth. On the economic front, Montreal remains in the bottom half of the peloton. But there are encouraging signs. The report puts forward 2 major items that should be prioritized to increase economic activity. First, we must improve our productivity. This is something I've said many times before, and it was also one of the issues raised in our recent Banking Committee report on the Canadian economy. This is not unique to Montreal. Canada has a major productivity deficit compared to the U.S. Second, despite being an attractive destination for post-secondary education, with world-class institutions in English and French, Montreal needs to increase the rate of educated and skilled workers. On that note, Montreal did crack the top 5 with respect to university grads in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which certainly helped the city inch up 2 spots to reach the 6th position for innovation. Bien que l'étude peigne un portrait.
Though the study paints a favorable portrait, it is clear that there's still room for improvement. The report recommends certain avenues for the Montreal economy and to ensure that Montreal achieves its full potential. Honourable Senators, I'm very pleased with this performance, which classes Montreal as a choice city for anyone coming to live there. Montreal is a great city to live in. Thank you very much. Senator Houssakos.
In 2017, the Trudeau government launched its feminist foreign policy, bragging that it would, and I quote, position Canada as a champion for gender equality. It appears, however, that this policy and claims about applying a feminist lens to our foreign policy is just for show. When it's time for real action and leadership, Canada is nowhere to be found. I'm talking, colleagues, about the deafening silence in the face of mounting evidence of Hamas rape and horrific acts of sexual violence committed against innocent Jewish Israeli women on October 7th and the denial of these acts of even occurring. Hamas was not shy about having committed these heinous crimes. They filmed and published videos, including one showing them with a young kidnapped Israeli woman with blood-soaked pants as they paraded her through the streets of Gaza. Hamas terrorists have also admitted to the atrocities in now public police interrogations. In other cases, eyewitnesses have bravely come forward about the horrors they saw. One woman spoke about seeing her friend gang raped and having her breast cut off. She went on to describe how some Hamas terrorists started playing with the discarded breast while others continued the gang rape until one of them shot the woman in the head while still in the act of her being raped. Israeli paramedics and first responders were first upon the horrific scenes of bodies found strewn throughout Israel border communities, having shared their stories of witnessing young women, some even in their early teens, found without their pants and with evidence of rape on their bodies. Others describe women with broken pelvis as so violent was the sexual attack against them. But for some unknown reason, despite our feminist foreign policy, the minister responsible has yet to comment on these crimes. And sadly, to my knowledge, as these details have emerged, none of our colleagues from the government or anyone in Parliament have called out Hamas for violating international law by using rape as a weapon of war and targeting innocent young women in this way. Worse, we are seeing our elected officials at provincial and municipal levels, as well as academics and even those responsible for university sexual assault centres, signing on to statements denying Hamas rape and sexual assault. This denial is all too familiar for Jewish people. So where are all the voices who talk about standing up for women? Why has no one stood up in this chamber? The silence by many parliamentarians and members of our government who claim to be defenders of women's rights is an abdication of responsibility that allows Hamas to get away with these unspeakable crimes. It also sends a message to the Jewish community here in Canada that their families abroad are not worthy of this feminist government's concern. Failing to issue strong statements of condemnation further allows for these stories of denial to permeate in our streets and our social media, resulting in Jewish women, young and old, feeling unsafe and unimportant. Colleagues, we can and we must all do better. Thank you.
Here.
Senator Klein.
Honourable Senators, I rise before you today to mark the grand opening of the Soleos Sustainable Fertilizer Production Facility in Rosetown, Saskatchewan. This event is a testament to the innovative spirit and commitment to sustainability that defines my great province. The new facility opened its doors on October 11 and is a result of the ongoing partnership between AGT Foods and Lucient Biosciences. The Protein Industries Canada Supercluster also contributed to the project. The new facility is a state-of-the-art with a focus on sustainability, carbon sequestration, and the principles of a circular economy. This is a proud beacon of modern agriculture. Soleos is an example of smart fertilization, employing the better use of micronutrients to boost yield on the same amount of nitrogen fertilizer, doing more with less. Soleos takes a waste byproduct and puts it back into the soil to benefit the growth of the next crop. It is made into pellets and when added to the soil, binds micronutrients to cellulose and uses the soil's natural biological activity to release nutrients into the crop. The important side benefit of the Soleos suite of products is that it also results in lowering the carbon intensity of crop production. The agriculture sector has demonstrated a tremendous potential for climate action, such as cover cropping, zero-till farming, rotational grazing, and intercropping. Supportive initiatives like Soleos aligns with Canada's objectives for a greener and more sustainable future. It is through the synergy of government, industry, and community that we can create opportunities for future generations, protect our environment, ensure that Saskatchewan remains a thriving and resilient province. Colleagues, the new Soleos Sustainable Fertilizer Production Facilities is more than just a factory. It is a symbol of our shared commitment to responsible land stewardship, environmental sustainability, and the well-being of our communities. This facility showcases the potential for economic growth while respecting our precious environment. By utilizing cutting-edge technology and sustainable practices, Soleos has shown that progress and sustainability could go hand in hand. Thank you. Merci and hai kitatamahin.
Honourable Senators, I wish to draw your attention to the presence in the gallery of Fiona and Mark Harper. They are the guests of the Honourable Senator Deakin, Ontario, and on behalf of all Senators, I welcome you to the Senate of Canada. Senator Deakin, Ontario.
Thank you. Senators, I am thankful for this last-minute opportunity to speak today and for the chance to speak to something I've been meaning to for a while. I'd like to take us back to June. Shortly after we rose from the Senate for the summer, at Hagey Hall on the campus of the University of Waterloo, a planned and targeted attack was carried out on students in a gender studies class. The accused, a recent Waterloo graduate, stabbed and injured 3 people who were sent to hospital with injuries. Fortunately, each one of them had physically recovered. This violated and shocked the community, the university community, particularly the LGBTQ2+ community, who were actively celebrating Pride Month. Over the early days, this was confirmed to be a hate-motivated incident related to gender expression and gender identity. Approximately 40 students were inside the classroom during the stabbings, a 38-year-old associate professor from Kitchener and 2 students, a 20 and a 19-year-old. I had the opportunity to meet with students on the campus on picnic tables closely placed in a big circle at Hagey Hall 2 days after this incident. I listened as heartache, shock, anger were articulated and articulated very well. Universities Canada, an association which represents universities across the country, condemned this violence. In a statement, it said, "It is deeply concerning that the attack targeted those seeking inclusion in our communities." From Professor Morrison, Associate Professor of English at the University of Waterloo, to quote, "This broke my heart. It terrified me. This is a building I work in each and every day. I teach in that classroom. I teach students similar curriculum. All of us are a lot less safe or feel less safe because of this." As the days and weeks have passed, this incident has sparked much debate, thought, and action. Post-secondary institutions must ensure they remain arenas of free debate while protecting marginalized groups at the center of polarizing discussion and issues. We all know that the freedom to explore differences and to challenge conventional wisdom is at the heart of what universities and colleges are all about, and they should be. However, one of the things that we are also very clear upon in Canada, free expression does not include the right to express yourself or incite that violence. While still very rare, this terrible incident at Waterloo has demonstrated that new ideas, open discussion, and debate can breed violence, especially when mixed with the recent political discourse on the rights of our LGBTQ2+ youth in our schools. Universities and colleges are responding with recognition, and those LGBTQ+ have come under increasing assault across Canada in a variety of settings. Colleagues, I urge all of us to reflect on this incident. The opinions we express can often have unintended, real-world consequences for individual Canadians. Like this chamber, we must ensure all educational institutions are safe, welcoming, inclusive places for learning.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Down.
Senators, in these difficult days in the chamber, I rise to advise you of some good news regarding one of our colleagues. Earlier this week, the President of Armenia awarded Senator Leo Housakis with the Order of Friendship for his contribution to the development of closer ties between Armenia and Canada and his dedication to pursuing universal human values. The Order of Friendship of Armenia is awarded for significant services in promoting mutual understanding in the political, scientific, and educational, cultural, and religious fields. Prior to the presentation ceremony, the President spent up to an hour discussing with Senator Housakis Canada and Armenia relations, the political situation in the region, and the appreciation Armenians feel towards Canada for our establishment of the first Canadian embassy in Armenia 4 or 5 weeks ago. After meeting with the President, we were advised that the Prime Minister of Armenia also wanted to meet with Senator Housakis and the rest of the Canadian delegation to the OSCE meeting. The Prime Minister emphasized Canada's support for democratic institutions in that country and the decision of the Canadian government to participate in the European Union civil mission in Armenia. Speaking of our diplomatic relations, and I know the Senate pages will be particularly interested in this, it turns out that Canada's first ambassador to Armenia is a former Senate page. So we may have some future ambassadors among us today. Prior to his appointment, Ambassador Andrew Turner was in the Senate during the debate over the recognition of the Armenian genocide, a decision that was controversial at the time when Canada was one of the first countries to acknowledge the genocide. And now, Mr. Turner is our ambassador to Armenia, so he certainly knows the history of that country. Colleagues, throughout his involvement in international issues, Senator Housakis has consistently advocated for a democratic Armenia in a part of the world where there are few democracies, and his ongoing work with Armenian Canadians has been key to help push the Government of Canada to establish an embassy there. His service to Canada and to international relations was well recognized with this award. It was an honor to him personally, and I might say it was the first time I ever saw him speechless. He had few words. He was so moved, and a very nice ceremony. And it was an honor to the Canadian Senate as an example of the impact individual senators can have on public policy. Thank you, colleagues.
Dépôt de documents, tabling of documents. Presenting or tabling reports from committees, présentation, dépôt de rapports de comité. Préavis de motion du gouvernement, government notices of motions. Government notices of inquiries, préavis d'interpellation du gouvernement, dépôt et première lecture de projet de loi du gouvernement, introduction and first reading of government bills, introduction and first reading of Senate public bills, dépôt et première lecture de projet de loi d'intérêt public du Sénat, première lecture de projet de loi d'intérêt public des communes, first reading of common public bills, reading of petitions for private bills, lecture de pétitions pour des projets de loi d'intérêt privé, dépôt et première lecture de projets de loi d'intérêt privé, introduction and first reading of private bills, tabling of reports from interparliamentary delegations, dépôt de rapports de délégations interparlementaires, préavis de motion, notices of motions, Senator Housakos.
Honourable Senators, I give notice that at the next sitting of the Senate, I will move that notwithstanding the order of the Senate adopted on Thursday, February 10, 2022, that the date for the final report of the Standing Senate Committee on Transport and Communications in relation to its study on the impacts of climate change on critical infrastructure in the transportation and communication sectors and consequential impacts on their interdependencies be extended from November 30th, 2023 to November 30th, 2024.
Notices of inquiries, préavis d'interpellation, dépôt de pétitions, tabling of petitions, question period, période de questions. Sénatrice Mégy.
Merci, Madame.
Senator Miji. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the chair of SEBA, the SEBA committee. Madam Chair, how much does a Senate operation cost when there is 1 hour's pause for a vote? So 1 hour and 15 minutes pause for a vote. Do you have that information? Senator Motion. Thank you, Senator Miji, for the question. I do not have that information, but I could provide it to you. What information I can give you is that for the duration of the time the bell is ringing, all senators are waiting. All of the staff is waiting. All people are also waiting for the sitting to resume. So I would say that it's between 150 and 200 people who are waiting. And there are costs related to this, whether it be in terms of overtime pay or salary. The question can be put to Senate administration that could hopefully give us more precise information.
Répond Senator Platt.
Senator Platt.
I would like to ask a follow-up question of the chair of SEBA, if she would take that.
Senatrice Motion.
Senator Motion.
Maybe when you do that, Madam Chair, you could also find out what the impact and implications would be had by having a 15-minute bell or a vote now when there are committees meeting and senators are not available to come here because we have, of course, duties right across the entire Parliament Hill, right across the sector. And maybe you could explain, when you do explain the numbers, some of the reasons why we have a 1-hour bell versus a vote now or a 15-minute bell. Thank you.
Senatrice Motion.
Senator Motion.
Answer right now, so we will look into it and bring back an answer to Senator Platt.
Réponse différée, delayed answers. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Other business, autres affaires. Reports of committees, other, rapport de comité, autres. Number 57, first report, ethics and conflict of interest for senators.
Senator Seidman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I move the adoption of the report.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Seidman, seconded by the Honourable Senator Poirier, that this report be adopted. On debate, Senator Seidman.
Honourable Senators, I rise today on behalf of the Standing Senate Committee on Ethics and Conflict of Interest for Senators to speak to its first report, which presents the committee's findings and recommendations in relation to an inquiry report from the Senate Ethics Officer concerning the conduct of Senator Michael L. McDonald. The inquiry report relates to Senator McDonald's conduct on the evening of February 16, 2022, when he made a series of comments to a member of the public, which were recorded and then disseminated on social media and national media. Over the month that followed, the Senate Ethics Officer received 9 requests from senators asking for an inquiry to determine whether Senator McDonald's behavior on that night breached his obligations under the Ethics and Conflict of Interest Code for senators. The SEO undertook a preliminary review and on June 21, 2022, informed Senator McDonald that he would conduct an inquiry into the matter. On July 18, 2023, the SEO provided his inquiry report to your committee, who that same day tabled the report with the Senate through the clerk. It immediately became a public document. In his inquiry report, the SEO found Senator McDonald's conduct to be in breach of subsections 7.11 and 2 of the Code because of the comments he made and the language he used when speaking to the member of the public on that February evening. He also found that Senator McDonald breached subsections 48.7, 7.11, and 2, and section 7.2 of the Code for failing to cooperate throughout the inquiry process. Upon receiving the SEO's inquiry report, your committee met promptly, as required by the Code, on August 4, 2023, to begin its study. Since then, it has been the committee's main priority. Your committee met 8 times to review the inquiry report, met with Senator McDonald, considered his written and oral submissions, agreed on appropriate sanctions, and worked expeditiously to prepare this report. Before I proceed to the specific recommendations in this report, it is important to advise you that this study represents very serious work and careful consideration undertaken by all members, and the report reflects the views and conclusions of your committee. I also want to emphasize that consideration of the SEO's inquiry report by your committee and then considerations of the committee's recommendations by the Senate itself are part of a comprehensive enforcement process set out in the Code. This Code makes clear that following an inquiry, it is the Senate Ethics Officer alone who determines whether a senator has breached his or her obligations under the Code. As part of its study, your committee is also expected to afford the senator who is the subject of the inquiry an opportunity to be heard. When the SEO finds that a senator has breached the Code, your committee is expected to recommend appropriate remedial measures or sanctions and report these recommendations to the Senate. The final step is for the Senate to consider your committee's report and recommendations. It is up to the Senate itself to exercise final and exclusive authority with respect to remedial measures and sanctions. And that final stage of consideration begins today. It is important to remind honourable senators that the rules of the Senate prescribe specific timelines for consideration of reports from this committee when they concern a senator. These rules are meant to ensure a prompt decision from the Senate, while also respecting the right of the senator who is the subject of the report to be heard. Consequently, no vote on this report can take place until the 5th sitting day following today's motion to adopt the report, unless the senator who is the subject of the report has spoken. The rules also provide that the Senate must decide on the report no later than 15 sitting days after the motion to adopt the report has been moved. In his inquiry report, the SEO made 2 findings of breaches of the Code. First, the SEO found that Senator McDonald's behavior on the night of February 16, 2022, did not, and I quote, uphold the highest standards of dignity inherent to the position of a senator, end of quote, as required by subsection 7.11 of the Code. He also found that Senator McDonald did not, and I quote, refrain from acting in a way that could reflect adversely on the position of senator or the institution of the Senate, as required by subsection 712 of the Code. It is important to remind all honourable senators, but especially those who have come to this chamber more recently, that Section 7.1 is part of a series of code amendments that were adopted by the Senate between 2008 and 2014 to reassert the commitment of the Senate and of each senator to uphold the highest standards of conduct. Specifically, the 2014 amendments established rules of general conduct and ethical behavior for senators. At that time, the Senate renamed the code the Ethics and Conflict of Interest Code for senators to serve as a reminder that upholding the highest standards of conduct requires more than just the simple avoidance of conflicts of interest. To further emphasize this change, the Ethics and Conflict of Interest Committee also issued a directive to the SCO stating, and I quote, "These rules of general conduct are also applicable to all conduct of a senator, whether directly related to parliamentary duties and functions or not, which would be contrary to the highest standards of dignity inherent to the position of senator and or would reflect adversely on the position of senator or the institution of the Senate." These amendments and this directive are relevant to Senator McDonald's situation. That is, because the issues relevant to this inquiry relate to the senator's ethics, including behavior in his personal life and non-Senate activities. This is what led to the finding that Senator McDonald's conduct on February 16, 2022, breached the ethics provisions of the Code. The SCO also found that Senator McDonald's failure to cooperate during the inquiry process constituted further breaches of subsections 711 and 2. In addition, Senator McDonald's conduct was found to breach Section 7.2, which provides, and I quote, "A senator shall perform his or her parliamentary duties and functions with dignity, honour, and integrity," and subsection 48.7, which requires, and I quote, "cooperate without delay with the Senate ethics officer in respect of any inquiry," end of quote. Honourable Senators, I wish to expand for a moment on the question of cooperation. It is not the role of the committee to make a determination as to whether or not Senator McDonald breached the code. That is for the SCO to determine. Your committee does, however, feel a responsibility to remind all senators of the essential nature of cooperation with the SCO. The committee accepts that at least initially, Senator McDonald genuinely misunderstood his obligations under the inquiry process. However, all senators are expected to understand their obligations and duties under the Code, and that includes the enforcement process. A lack of awareness of this process does not excuse a senator from meeting their obligations under the Code, including the duty to cooperate in an inquiry. The committee noted that despite repeated explanations of the process provided to Senator McDonald by the SCO, Senator McDonald maintained his position and declined to cooperate. Honourable Senators, the Code is an instrument of the Senate itself. It has adopted it in order to uphold the highest standard of dignity and integrity inherent to the position of a senator, and to ensure that the actions of its members do not reflect adversely on the institution. A failure to cooperate in the inquiry process challenges the ability of the Senate itself to effectively oversee the conduct of its own members. Having considered the nature and extent of the breaches found by the SCO and taking into account Senator McDonald's submissions, the committee then turned to the issue of appropriate remedial measures or sanctions. The Code provides a non-exhaustive list of remedial measures or sanctions that the committee might recommend to the Senate. In determining which of these measures is appropriate in the circumstances, your committee applied criteria laid out in its fifth report from 2019, which recommended that the committee consider, 1, the seriousness of the breach and its impact on the senator's ability to continue to perform their parliamentary duties and functions. 2, the effect of the breach on other senators and on the respect, dignity, and integrity of the Senate as an institution. And 3, public confidence and trust in the Senate. In applying these criteria, your committee makes 2 recommendations. First, it recommends that the Senate direct Senator MacDonald to provide a sincere, unqualified apology in the chamber for his breach of subsections 711 and 2 of the Code in relation to his conduct on February 16, 2022, and for his breach of subsections 48.7, 7.11, 2, and 7.2 of the Code in relation to his lack of cooperation in the inquiry conducted by the SEO. We also recommend that the Senate direct Senator MacDonald post this apology on his Senate and personal websites, as well as his Senate and personal social media accounts. Recommending that a senator apologize for breaches of his or her obligations under the Code is not a new or an unusual measure. It is already contemplated as a remedial measure or sanction in the non-exhaustive list provided in the Code. This committee has also made similar recommendations in the past. Your committee's second recommendation is that the Senate censure Senator MacDonald for his breach of subsections 711 and 2 of the Code in relation to his conduct on February 16, 2022, and for his breach of subsections 711 and 2, section 72, and subsection 48.7 of the Code in relation to his lack of cooperation in the inquiry conducted by the Senate Ethics Officer. Censure is a recognized formal expression of a legislative body's disapproval of the conduct in which one of its members has engaged. Censure holds an important role for the Senate as a visible mark on the parliamentary record, denoting the shared values of senators, denunciating specific conduct, and aiming to deter others from engaging in similar conduct in the future. Adopting this sanction would mean that the Senate agrees with the committee that Senator MacDonald's conduct fell short of what is expected of senators. It would also serve as a reminder of the importance of abiding by the Code that each senator has pledged to uphold. It should be noted that in 2020, this committee recommended censure in similar circumstances, stating that censure, and I quote, would mean that the Senate agrees with the committee's view that a senator's conduct fell short of what was expected, end of quote. In that case, the Senate concurred with the committee's recommendation of a censure. In closing, colleagues, if you have not already read both the SEO's report and this committee's report, I encourage you to do so. It is the duty of all senators to abide by the obligations set out in the Code. This is a public interest obligation of the Senate as an institution, and of each of us as members of the institution. It imposes on senators a greater, not lesser, responsibility to ensure that our members are accountable for their conduct. Thank you.
Honourable Senators, pursuant to Rule 1229(2), a decision cannot be taken on this report as yet. Debate on the report, unless some other senator wishes to adjourn the matter, will be deemed adjourned until the next sitting of the Senate. Is that agreed, Honourable Senators?
Government business, affaires du gouvernement. Bills third reading, projet de loi troisième lecture. Number 1, C29.
Stand.
Numéro 2, C30.
Number 2, C35.
Thank you, Madam President. I resume my discussion around Bill C35. I left off when I was talking about the section that ensures accountability that the federal government going forward must take. It is a stake in the ground that holds Ottawa accountable, and it is how, through the agreements, Ottawa will work with the provinces to keep them accountable. Reading from Section 7.1, federal investments respecting the establishment and maintenance of a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, as well as the efforts to enter into related agreements with the provinces and Indigenous peoples must be guided by the principles by which early learning and child care programs and services should be accessible, affordable, inclusive, and of high quality. The following paragraphs detail what is meant by this. Paragraph A tells us that federal investments must support the provision of equitable access to high-quality care with a preference for expansion in public and not-for-profit spaces. These services must be licensed, built on evidence-based practices, and respond to the varying needs of children and families. Paragraph B tells us that the federal investment into childcare must contribute to making childcare more affordable for all families. Let's talk about paragraph C. Paragraph C tells us that federal investments must support access for rural and remote communities and the expansion of services for children with disabilities, official language minority communities, and children from other marginalized groups. It reiterates the obligation for federal investments to respond to the varying needs of families, this time adding respect and the value of diversity. I want to pause here because paragraph C is extraordinarily important. What it says is that the federal government must invest in childcare services for children with disabilities. It is clear from paragraph C that the federal government must invest in rural and remote communities to ensure greater access there. It is also clear from paragraph C that the obvious intent of this bill is that the federal government must invest in childcare services for official language minority communities. That is an obligation that will be placed into law should this bill be given royal assent. It is a certainty that every family who is in a community where there is official language in a minority, that they can expect that by law the federal government will ensure that its investment will allow for greater access to childcare spaces so that their language, their culture, their identity can be passed down to their children and their children's children. This paragraph, colleagues, ensures that no one is left behind. It commits Ottawa to ensuring that funding in perpetuity for these groups continues as is reflected in the agreements. By placing these elements within the guiding principles, it makes clear the intent of Parliament that these groups receive federal funding to ensure proper access to high-quality childcare that meets their needs. And moving on to paragraph D. Paragraph D tells us that federal investments should contribute to high-quality childcare that supports the social, emotional, physical, and cognitive development of young children by ensuring a strong workforce. Indeed, all governments have recognized the core role of the workforce, and developing this workforce is an important dimension of the agreements that are already in place and will be an ongoing part of the work of building a strong ELC system going into the future. In subsection 2, we are told that the federal investments and agreements with Indigenous peoples must be guided by the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Framework. As I said at second reading, Canada has co-developed an Indigenous early learning and childcare system with Indigenous communities and governments. This subsection has the effect of ensuring that Canada will continue to make investments based on this framework and in collaboration with Indigenous peoples. Finally, subsection 3 tells us that the federal investments must be guided by the Official Languages Act, or the OLA. As we know, colleagues, one of the purposes of the Official Languages Act is, and I quote, to support the development of English and French linguistic minority communities in order to protect them while taking into account the fact that they have different needs, end of quote. This is just one purpose. Section 7 tells us that the federal investments must be guided by the entire Act. In fact, we know that this quasi-constitutional Act aims to ensure the respect and substantive equality of both official languages throughout and across Canada. This is very important. By including the OLA in Section 7, Bill C-35 therefore creates an obligation for investments to not only focus on official language minority communities now, but to also consider the future development and evolution of both official languages in Canada, in line with the OLA. In summary, we see in Section 7 the rules of engagement, and we can understand that there are specific obligations that Canada must respect when working with provinces to make investments in childcare. Section 7 decides where the money goes. And it tells us that investments in high-quality, affordable, and inclusive care that meets the needs of families through funding in public and not-for-profit places is non-negotiable. Paired with Section 8, which tells us the Government of Canada commits to maintaining long-term funding for ELCC through agreements with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples. We have a guarantee of an ongoing funding commitment based on the rules of engagement already outlined in Section 7. Therefore, whether you need care that is culturally sensitive and in the language of your ancestors, whether you're a parent with a disabled child in urban Vancouver or rural northern BC, whether you're an Anglophone in Quebec or a Francophone outside of Quebec, Section 7 and 8 of Bill C-35 guarantees that the federal government will continue to work towards making sure that one day you have access to affordable and high-quality care that meets your needs. So, colleagues, I've spoken at length about the bill, but I'd like to take a moment to turn towards our work at committee and to specifically talk to why, in my opinion, the bill has come back to us unamended. First of all, it's my belief that our study was robust. We met with childcare workers, economists, academics. We met with community leaders, Indigenous governments. We heard from parents with children with disabilities, parents who did not currently have access to childcare in the language of their choice. What we heard is that more progress is needed, and it's needed faster. What we heard was that Canadians believe in the benefits of Canada-wide ELCC, and that fee reductions have been an important step forward. Yet, space creation and workforce development are still crucially needed. I want to thank, once more, all the witnesses for their voice and for their time, even those with whom I did not agree. Many amendments were proposed by witnesses and during clause by clause. Nevertheless, the bill has come back to us unamended, and I want to speak to this. Colleagues, we are building and expanding a significant and immensely complex social program, one that hinges on relationships and on negotiation, one that is based on collaboration and shared vision. In this exercise, the federal government has many partners it has to work with to see this through. And I think we need to be patient as we work to build our childcare system, especially doing the important things like training workers and building spaces, among other critical steps. It also means that as federal legislators, we have to remember that Canadians want C-35 to be adopted. For them, it means a guarantee that ELCC is here to stay. They're looking for this certainty. Consider Jennifer Nangreaves, Executive Director of the Early Childhood Development Association of Prince Edward Island. who told us, and I quote, "The position of the ECDA is that we are absolutely in support of Bill C-35. The importance of having federal commitment to the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, no matter the government in power in future, will allow for true system building across our country. Having access to predictable, appropriate, and sustained funding instead of what has been in the past, with grants here or there, will provide stability and predictability that will allow for strategic and long-term investments so that the provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples can reach their goals in achieving a high-quality, accessible, and affordable early learning and childcare system," end quote. Her words resonated with me. Canadians are looking to this bill for certainty. They're looking to Parliament for certainty. We must remember this as we deliberate today. I believe that the committee in the other place did a strong job in amending this bill and strengthened it significantly. I'm also aware of the political tensions in the House of Commons and know that amending the bill would lead to perhaps to delays in its adoption, which would create greater uncertainty for Canadians. So for every amendment, I weighed whether or not the uncertainty was worth the proposed change. And I will say, honourable colleagues, that none of the amendments brought forward resolved substantive issues or challenges that I felt warranted delaying the adoption of this legislation for many months. Therefore, I argued and voted against all the amendments that were tabled, and the majority of the committee seemed to have agreed. Honourable Senators, I want to acknowledge one concern that was heard from official languages minority communities. Many felt that they needed to be included in Section 8 of the bill to ensure they continue to receive long-term funding. It is their concern that without this inclusion, the courts would assume that Parliament meant to exclude them from ongoing funding commitments, despite Section 7, as I outlined it. Colleagues, in due respect, I do not agree with this concern, but I acknowledge it. I believe, as I've argued, that the rules of engagement are outlined in Section 7, the funding principles, and that these are very clear indicators of what Parliament intends for ongoing funding to include. Nevertheless, I've worked with the Fédération des Communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada and with Senators Cormier, Senator Monsignor, to create and craft a statement that clarifies this without the shadow of a doubt. And I'll read that now. I'm aware of the ordinary principles of statutory interpretation and the relevant case law on language rights. In particular, I'm aware that the Supreme Court of Canada in Caron versus Alberta refused to recognize the existence of language rights because of the absence of explicit guarantees in the relevant constitutional and legislative texts. Consequently, as sponsor of this bill, I wish to express a clear intention that the text of Section 8 implicitly includes a guarantee of long-term funding for early learning and childcare programs and services for official language minority communities. It is my understanding that as Bill C-35 is currently drafted, the intention has always been for Francophone communities to continue to be part of federal, provincial, territorial discussions within the framework of funding agreements. I'd like to emphasize this point. Protecting the interests of official language minority communities and other minority groups is not mutually exclusive. Often, communities intersect, and individuals are at the intersection points of several minority groups. To conclude, I'll make a clear clarification regarding terminology used in the bill on the issue of official language minority communities. I'd like to acknowledge that there are indeed two different terms used in the bill, C-35, that refer to official language minority communities. But I assure you that despite the two different terms used, they do respect the spirit of the Official Languages Act. I want to thank Senators Cormier and Saint-Amoncion, as well as the FCFA, for their partnership and for their collaboration. I look forward to continuing to work with you to ensure every child can learn and grow in the language of their families. Honorable colleagues, thank you for your attention and for your hard work. I look forward to hearing from other speakers, and I look forward to seeing this bill become law. Thank you. Merci.
Senator Cormier and Senator Marshall and Senator Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would Senator Moody take a question?
I will.
Thank you, Senators. Well, first, thank you for drawing attention to the incoherent terminology used in the bill and clarifying the intent and scope of Clause 8, which deals with the long-term funding of official language minority communities. Like you said, I understand from your speech that you support the principle that protecting the interest of official language minority communities and other minority groups is not mutually exclusive. Often, like you said, communities do intersect and individuals are at the intersection of several minority groups. However, in opposition to one of my amendments presented at committee, which was intended to clarify the government's commitment to the official language minority communities, you stated that, Senator, and I quote, "Equally concerning are some of the comments that we heard from ITK President Nathan Obed, who expressed concerns to us right here in this committee that this amendment would harm language rights for Inuit peoples," end of quote. So do you still maintain this position today? And if so, could you clarify it, as your comments seems to contradict in a certain way each other?
Thank you.
Senator Moody.
Senator Cormier. So in my response to your question there, I reminded you, another member of the committee, of President Nathan Obed's words. His own language, when asked, I think he was posed a question by, was it Saint-Amoncion, about how this would affect, if any, the indigenous peoples. And that was his response. His language is in the answer, it's clear, and he did raise concern. And I stated a fact. You asked me if I stand by what I've said today. I absolutely do. I think that there is no question that there's an intersection of racial minorities, of language requirements, of people with disabilities. All communities are very, very keen to see and make sure that their interests are represented in this law and that their children are offered the best possible child care. And I think that working together, that's where we focus for the future. We work to build that as a country, and we try to make sure that we ensure the rights of all groups, including rural and remote children, that they get access to care as well. So my position stands today, and in fact, the answer that I gave you then simply reflects the facts of what President Obed said.
Senator Marshall, I'll put you back on the list. Senator Marshall?
Thank you very much, Speaker. And Senator Moody, thanks very much for your question, for your speech. And I was hanging on to every word you were saying there, because early in your speech you were saying about no one being left behind. And what I'm hearing from people in the community, not just in my home province of Newfoundland and Labrador, but a number of other provinces, is that there are many families not able to access the $10 a day daycare. So it's available to some families, but it's not available to other families. And then in other instances, not only is the $10 a day daycare not available, but there's no daycare available, and that families are struggling, to arrange daycare or child care arrangements for their children. And I know in my own province, the CBC radio has actually had several articles on it. Doctors who cannot return to work because they don't have child care. Did that issue come up during your study of the bill?
I'm sorry, Senator Moody, your time for debate has expired. Her time has. So you're asking for 5 more minutes? Is leave granted? Agreed. Senator Moody.
Senator Martin, you are correct. Senator Marshall, sorry, you are correct. We heard that. We heard that the workforce is in trouble, that it needs to be built. We heard about fee structuring, supporting professional development. We heard about a number of key factors, gaps, if you will, of the current system. There is no question that this is a new system that's being built, that what exists already in the landscape is a mixture of varying levels of service, of varying levels of quality, service being provided, of areas where there is no service. That is clear, and that was loudly heard at committee. And I think it's acknowledged that we have work to be done here, that that the provinces have outlined in their agreements how they see the action plan of moving this forward, of building on what exists in some places, of creating new. And there's a clear recognition, in answer to your question, that there are areas like gaps, like you identified.
I'm going to go to Senator Quinn, and I'll come back to you if you don't mind. Senator Quinn?
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you for your speech, Senator Moody. My question really comes back to Section 8. You acknowledged that there was concern with Section 8 in terms of courts in the future maybe not interpreting funding as the case that you quoted, being guaranteed and locked in, and that's the purpose. And the funding is the subject matter of Section 8. My question is that in your statement, you made it clear that you support that there needs to be the guarantee that funding is ongoing. And if that is the case, then why wouldn't we make it explicit? Because as a new system is being developed, why would we want to put future generations at risk of having a court review a case and make the determination that it's not explicit, therefore they would not be in favor of locking in funding for those enriched minority groups across the country, not just in New Brunswick?
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your question, Senator Quinn. I'm not one for using harried statements, and I believe that there is work to be done in building our system. I believe that the legislation as written supports and clearly states in the area of Section 7, where it talks about the guiding principles, and it clearly outlines the who and the why of what we need to support in our childcare system as we build moving forward. I also believe that Section 8 speaks to the funding mechanisms that exist and how money would flow from the federal government to the establishment on the ground in the provinces, in the territories, and in Indigenous governments, how that money would flow. And I think that the legislation states it clearly. And I think that the groups of children that must be protected are clearly outlined in the guiding principles. So I believe that the Act, the legislation, already states what it needs to state. I believe that we need to strengthen the system. and that there may be future need for improvements. Clearly, I do believe that. We are starting to build at the foundational level, and there is no question that there are gaps, and anybody who would suggest that that's not the case would not be giving you the truth.
Senator Marshall?
Yes,
quick question.
Senator Moody, you were saying that the bill is being reported back with no amendments. So are there any observations attached to it which would address the issue of lack of access to $10 a day daycare or lack of access to any daycare, any childcare?
Senator Moody.
There are a number of, thank you, Madam Chair. There are a number of observations that speak to strengthening the system, that speak to funding particular groups, and they do, I think, enhance and draw attention to the areas that were discussed during committee. And I think that they do pinpoint, if you will, some of the gaps that we have seen and the need to continue work and to
Senator Moody,
observe the government that they need to improve.
your time has expired. Senator Cordy.
So Senator Moody has answered all the questions. Honourable Senators, I rise today at third reading to speak in support of Bill C-35, an act respecting early learning and childcare in Canada. I want to thank you, Senator Moody, for your detailed, very detailed speech explaining Bill C-35 and its importance as a social contract. I also want to thank you for your hard work in sponsoring this bill in the Senate. I also want to thank the members of the Social Affairs Committee for your very thoughtful and very important questions and comments when we studied this bill. This bill is a first step towards the federal government's commitment to facilitating a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system and a $10 a day childcare program. It sets out the government's commitment to maintaining long-term funding relating to early learning and childcare to be provided to the provinces, the territories, and to Indigenous communities. Along with these commitments, the bill will also establish the National Advisory Council on Early Learning and Childcare. As a former elementary school teacher and as a grandmother, I see firsthand how important early learning and accessible quality childcare is to young Canadians and to their families. Honourable Senators, it is essential that children are given the best possible start to set them up for a lifetime of learning. Canadian families from every corner of the country experience barriers to accessing inclusive, culturally appropriate, inclusive, high-quality childcare. Too few childcare spaces and rising costs have left many families struggling to find affordable care for their children. We heard a wide variety of witnesses from across the country at the Social Affairs, Science and Technology Committee. The committee heard that disparities have persisted in Canada when it comes to access to high-quality and culturally appropriate childcare for Indigenous families, lower-income families, new Canadians, language minority communities, and for those living outside urban areas. Bridging these gaps is going to take time, successful planning, and financial support. I believe Bill C-35 will go a long way to help families to find affordable and quality care. The federal government has shown its support to the provinces and territories and to Indigenous communities with their commitment of funding through the signed funding agreements. To unlock the federal funding, provinces and territories have agreed to submit action plans and progress reports at the beginning of each fiscal year for the duration of the agreement. I believe the progress reports will be beneficial to governments, but more importantly, I believe they will be helpful to young families. In 2021, my province of Nova Scotia signed the Canada-Nova Scotia Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement, which provides a commitment to create 9,500 new childcare spaces and will move to $10 a day childcare by 2026. Under the agreement, the federal government will commit $123 million this fiscal year, $143 million for the next fiscal year, and $169 million for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year. This funding will be essential to develop strategies to meet the needs of all families with young children, but particularly for the Indigenous communities and French-speaking communities in my province of Nova Scotia. Honourable Senators, one of the major hurdles provinces and territories are facing when it comes to creating spaces is the labour shortage in the early childcare sector. We heard from several witnesses at committee about how difficult it is to find and retain, and the retention part is important, retain qualified, dedicated, and motivated staff. Jobs in the childcare sector have traditionally been filled by women, and they have traditionally been low-paying jobs with few benefits. And as such, there has been very little incentive for young people to pursue this industry as a career. Provinces and territories must find solutions to attract and to retain high-quality staff. In the case of Nova Scotia, this means staffing 9,500 new spaces by 2026. It must include higher wages and better benefits for employees if we are to retain quality staff, not just for the immediate future, but for the long term. As Taya Whitehead, Board Chair of the Canadian Childcare Federation, said, we encourage mechanisms to ensure that childcare funding remains predictable, sustainable, and sufficient in each province and territory based on the community needs and objectives of the agreements. Bill C-35 aims to be the mechanism to ensure predictable, sustainable, and sufficient financial support from successive federal governments in the future. Honourable Senators, I support Bill C-35. It is an essential piece of legislation to ensure future funding and support from the federal government beyond the current agreements which end in 2026. Honourable Senators, it is not often that we can have agreements of any kind arranged between the federal government and the provincial and territorial governments. This early childhood agreement has happened because governments at all levels have rightfully recognized that early learning and childcare in Canada must be a priority. I believe this is an opportunity not to be taken lightly. Canadian families need the supports that Bill C-35 will provide to ensure long-term access to inclusive, culturally appropriate, and high-quality childcare. I will be supporting Bill C-35. Thank you.
Senator Martin.
I move the adjournment of the debate.
Honorable Sénatrice Martin propose appui.
The Honourable Senator Martin, seconded by the Honourable Senator Poirier, moves that debate be moved to the next sitting of the Senate. Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion? Carried.
Number 3, C-48, on the motion and amendment.
Are senators ready for the question?
Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion as amended? No.
Those in favor of the motion will please say yay. Yay. Those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Nay. I think the nays have it. Any agreement on the bill?
The vote to the next sitting.
Conformément à l'article 9-10 du règlement,
Following Rule 9.5, the vote will be held at 5:30 at the next sitting of the Senate, and the bells will ring at 5:15 p.m.
Bills, second reading, projet de loi deuxième lecture, number 1, S15.
Senator Klein.
Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time.
Honorable Sénateur Klein propose.
The Honorable Senator Klein, seconded by the Honorable Senator Harder, moves that this bill be read a second time. On debate, Senator Klein.
Honourable Senators, today's a great day for animal welfare in Canada. I'm thrilled to rise as sponsor of Bill S-15, new government legislation to protect elephants and great apes in captivity. This bill is one of the strongest animal welfare bills in Parliament's history. Thank you to the government, especially Environment and Climate Change Minister Stephen Guilbeault, Government Representative Senator Mark Gold, and Parliamentary Secretary Julie DeBrusen for their efforts to bring this bill forward. I note that the introduction of Bill S-15 fulfills a 2021 government election and mandate letter commitment to introduce legislation to protect wild animals in captivity. That promise to Canadians followed the introduction of the Jane Goodall Act on this subject in 2020 by our former colleague, the Honourable Murray Sinclair, Chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, together with NP Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, the bill's House sponsor. I trust this government bill can build on the Senate's recent successes to protect animal welfare. These include Canada's whale and dolphin bill captivity laws, adopted through the leadership of Senators Moore, Sinclair, and Harder. Senator McDonald's shark fin ban. Senator Boyer's efforts to prevent animal abuse and dogfighting. Senator Stuart Olson's work to ban animal testing for cosmetics. And Senator Galvez and Delfon's amendments to Bill S-5 to phase out animal toxicity testing, which became law in June. As government legislation, Bill S-15 can move through this chamber and our committees with far greater priority and expeditiously than our related bill, S-241. The current version of the Jane Goodall Act, as you know, I am also sponsor of that bill, which was debated extensively at second reading over 14 months and stands referred to 3 Senate committees. Legally, and although drafted differently, Bill S-15 is essentially a piece of S-241, and as such has already received this chamber's strong support in principle. I will speak more about that relationship between the two bills. For now, let us focus on the animals. For elephants and great apes in captivity, Bill S-15 provides the enhanced legal protection they deserve, according to their scientifically established characteristics and needs. Elephants and great apes are self-aware, highly intelligent, emotional, and social. They love their friends and families, mourn their dead, and use tools. Great apes can even learn and communicate in American Sign Language, sometimes teaching the skill to each other. In many ways, these remarkable creatures are very much like us. Yet in Canada, possession of these creatures does not require a license or a justifiable purpose. Therefore, as with the Jane Goodall Act, Bill S-15 would prohibit new captivity of elephants and great apes, including breeding, unless licensed for individual welfare, conservation, or science. Also, like Bill S-241, this bill would prohibit the use of these species in performances for entertainment, which have occurred in recent years with elephants in Canada, and as far as we know, could still be ongoing. Bill S-15 can and should achieve the world's first nationally legislated phase-out of elephant activity. Over 20 captive elephants live in Canada at 4 locations, with most located at African Lion Safari near Hamilton, Ontario. Zoo de Granby and Edmonton Valley Zoo have already pledged to phase out keeping elephants. A grandfathered phase-out is recommended by scientists and other independent experts due to elephants' serious health. behavioral, and reproductive problems in captivity. In North American zoos, elephant deaths outpace births at a rate of 2 to 1, meaning their captivity does not have conservation value. Other considerations include the fact that all Canadian zoos with elephants have individuals taken from the wild, the need to keep these huge, wide-ranging creatures indoors for much of the Canadian winter, the ongoing risk of cruel separations of mother-daughter pairs in commercial transactions, the use of bullhooks in Canada, which are implements used to control elephants through pain and fear, and the use of elephants in recent years in Canada for rides and performances for entertainment. With elephants, Bill S-15 reflects changing social attitudes, which have evolved with our increasing scientific knowledge of these creatures. As Senator Sinclair said in debating the whale bill, we do not stand in judgment of those activities in the past, but we are seeking to establish appropriate policy and laws based on current knowledge going forward. With respect to great apes, Bill S-15 upholds Canada's sanctuary, conservation, and science programs for chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Great apes face exploitation and captivity in other countries and the risk of extinction in Africa and Asia. Bill S-15 can send a message to the world about the need to safeguard these species, humanity's closest living relatives, who share up to 98.8% of our DNA. Indeed, Bill S-15 would offer great apes some of the strongest legal protection in the world that could, for example, include conditions of licensing based on evolving scientific information about their well-being. Not to mention that the continuation of great ape conservation and science programs at high welfare standards is important to Dr. Jane Goodale, world-renowned scientist, conservationist, and UN Messenger of Peace, as her team continues to work with local communities to save great apes in the wild. Approximately 30 great apes live in Canada at 4 locations, with chimpanzees at Fauna Sanctuary near Montreal, gorillas and orangutans at the Toronto Zoo, and gorillas at the Calgary Zoo and Zoo de Granby. I commend these organizations for their excellent work and commitment to the well-being of the great apes in their care. As I mentioned, in 2020, our former colleague, the Honourable Murray Sinclair, laid the foundation to build S-15. He authored and introduced the original version of the Jane Goodall Act, Bill S-218, proposing to protect captive elephants, great apes, and potentially other wild species. In speaking to that bill, Senator Sinclair urged us to understand our connection to nature and to respect our fellow creatures. He said, and I quote, "In many Indigenous cultures, we use the phrase, all my relations, to express the interdependency and interconnectedness of all life forms and our relationship of mutual reliance and shared destiny. When we treat animals well, we act with both self-respect and mutual respect." End quote. I'm grateful for Senator Sinclair's wisdom and guidance in advancing Bill S-15, as well as the Jane Goodall Act. At this time of roadside zoos, mass extinction, and climate crisis, I take to heart his view that this bill will advance reconciliation with the natural world, a goal of the Truth and Reconciliations Commission report. In sponsoring Bill S-15, I hope both science and Indigenous knowledge will inspire senators and MPs to prioritize this bill for royal assent sooner than later and before the next election. Before getting into the details, thank you to the Canadian animal welfare NGOs whose dedicated work over the years has opened hearts and minds to compassionate legislation like Bill S-15. Thank you to Humane Canada, Animal Justice, World Animal Protection of Canada, HSI Canada, and ZooCheck Canada. In co-developing Bill S-241, which contains the policies in Bill S-15, thank you as well to Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, the Toronto Zoo, the Calgary Zoo, Wilder Institute, and Zoo de Granby. Many such voices are eager that measures in the Jane Goodall Act be considered in conjunction with Bill S-15, such as the ban on big cats at roadside zoos and as pets, and the Animal Care Organization's framework for excellent zoos, aquariums, and sanctuaries. I'm confident that our process will afford that opportunity, and I understand the government is open to potential amendments with the benefit of evidence presented on Bill S-241. Indeed, in my view as sponsor, as we debate Bill S-15 at second reading, the legislation is consistent with considering such amendments at later stages, particularly as both bills amend the same two statutes regarding wild animal captivity. Colleagues, I will speak to you today about 5 subjects relating to Bill S-15. First, the bill's legalities. Second, elephant captivity in Canada. Third, great ape sanctuary, conservation, and science programs in Canada. Fourth, potential amendments to Bill S-15. And fifth, the process ahead for this bill and our related but different S-241, the Jane Goodall Act. Legally, Bill S-15 would amend the animal cruelty section of the Criminal Code as well as the Wild Animal and Plant Protection and Regulation of International Interprovincial Trade Act, called the WAPRITA. This is a wildlife trade statute administered by Environment and Climate Change Canada. The bill will prohibit new captivity of elephants and great apes, including breeding, unless licensed for individual welfare, conservation, or science. Like Canada's 2019 whale and dolphin bills or laws, Bill S-15 authorizes the federal and provincial governments to potentially license breeding for these purposes, while cross-border transport is exclusively federal. Whether or not licenses should be granted by the Environment Minister and for what purpose is a question of fact and ethics. Based on the recommendations of independent scientists and other experts, my view is that licenses should not be granted for new elephant captivity in Canada. In considering the merits of a conservation or science program under the bill, such programs should hold the promise of significant contributions to the species' long-term survival in the wild. Notably, captive breeding has played a role in over half of the cases where extinction has been prevented for birds and mammals. In addition, Bill S-15 would prohibit the use of affected species in performances for entertainment, which have occurred with elephants in Canada in recent years. No potential licenses will be available for such performances. Unlike Bill S-241, Bill S-15 does not explicitly prohibit elephant rides, which have also occurred in recent years. This may be an amendment to consider. As with Canada's whale and dolphin laws, the penalty for illegal breeding or performance for entertainment would be a summary conviction and a fine up to $200,000. Unlike Bill S-241, Bill S-15 does not contain new sentencing measures to provide for potential relocation of wild animals involved in these offenses with cost. Constitutionally, Bill S-15 exercises the federal criminal power over animal cruelty and the federal trade and commerce power over international and provincial trade. Federal animal cruelty offenses have existed in Canada since 1892, and international trade restrictions are already in place for endangered species on conservation grounds. As well, provinces have long enacted complementary property and civil right laws to seize captive animals in distress, as well as patchwork municipal ownership restrictions. Bill S-15 would establish strong, sound, and uniform national restrictions for the species at issue. For senators looking to take a deep dive into the legal aspects of this legislation, I refer you to my written brief to our Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee on Bill S-241 of September 7th of this year. An important point is that legalities of Bill S-15 are the same as those of Canada's federal whale and dolphin captivity laws. That is, the Free Willy Bill, studied at our Fisheries and Oceans Committee and adopted by Parliament in 2019. Those amendments to the Criminal Code and the Fisheries Act serve as the legal model for Bill S-15. The Senate overwhelmingly endorsed the whale and dolphin bill's measures in a standing vote on Bill C-68. That government fisheries bill, sponsored by Senator Christmas, contained the then government representative Senator Harder's amendments to secure a vote on the whale measures, as well as Senator McDonald's shark fin ban. The Senate voted in favor of Bill 68 with 86 nays, 3 nays, and 2 abstentions. In the Senate's debate on Bill 68, Senator Harder said, and I quote, I hope the amendments in Bill 68 will stand as an example of the results that can be achieved when the government and the Senate work together to deliver the best possible public policy results for Canadians. I hope it can be a model going forward in a more independent, positive Senate." End quote. I note as well Canada's whale and dolphin captivity laws have worked well. Bill S-203, Senator Moore and Sinclair's Ending the Captivity of Whales and Dolphins Act, together with Bill 68, ended the breeding of beluga whales and the import of wild captured belugas and dolphins to marine land in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Those laws also resulted in a charge in 2021 for Marineland's allegedly illegal use of dolphins in a performance for entertainment purposes. Today, the Vancouver Aquarium no longer holds captive whales and dolphins, and a whale sanctuary currently in development in Nova Scotia provides hope for a better life for some of Marineland's over 30 remaining belugas. Since the passage of Canada's whale bill in 2019, France has banned whale and dolphin captivity, as has the Australian state of New South Wales, and the United States Congress is considering similar legislation with the SWIMS Act. With Bill S-15 building on the whale bill's success, the time has come to protect additional wild species in captivity, starting with elephants and great apes and considering other priorities like big cats. Colleagues, I focus now on the need to phase out elephant captivity in Canada. As Senator Sinclair told us in 2020, Asian and African elephants are the largest land animals in existence. Elephants are intelligent and highly emotional, with excellent memories and a strong sense of empathy. They experience the world primarily through smell and hearing. In fact, their sense of smell is five times stronger than a bloodhound's. Elephants use low-frequency sounds to communicate over several kilometers with pitches inaudible to humans. They can hear storms hundreds of kilometers away and change their routes days in advance to intercept rain. They have home ranges of between 400 and 10,000 square kilometers. Socially, elephants are matriarchal, living in herds of adult females with adolescents and young. Older females keep the knowledge that allows the herd to survive. During drought, the herd will follow a matriarch for days to a drinking hole no one else knows about, trusting her. Elephants are also altruistic. They try to revive sick or dying individuals, including strangers, lifting them up with their tusks to get them on their feet. Elephants mourn their dead, standing vigil over dead matriarchs. Honourable colleagues, 23 captive elephants live in Canada. African Lion Safari near Hamilton holds 17 Asian elephants, the largest group in North America, with at least 2 born in the wild. The Edmonton Valley Zoo is home to a lone Asian elephant named Lucy, born in the wild. In Quebec, Parc Safari has 2 African elephants, both born in the wild. Zoo de Granby has 3 African elephants, of which 2 were born in the wild. Obviously, removing elephants from Africa and Asia for display in North American zoos is counter to elephant conservation. At the expense of being repetitive, the Edmonton Valley Zoo and Zoo de Granby have committed to phasing out elephants. In 2011, Toronto City Council voted to send the Toronto Zoo's 3 remaining African elephants to a sanctuary in California, a journey paid for by Bob Barker. In 2014, 3 Asian elephants Calgary were relocated to warmer climate in the United States. Between the early 1990s and 2012, over 22 U.S. zoos shut down their elephant exhibits or announced phase-outs. In urging an elephant phase-out in Canada with Bill S-15, I rely on 2 letters from 23 independent scientists and other experts in the support of this policy. The letters are signed by global leaders in their field, such as Dr. Joyce Poole. They write, and I quote, "Scientific and experiential evidence indicates the use of elephants as performers, riding objects, and exhibit specimens can be physically and psychologically detrimental to these highly intelligent, sensitive, and self-aware animals. Confinement, restraint, travel, harmful training practices, exhibition, isolation, noise, performing, and exposure to the public while living in unnatural environments can adversely affect elephants' health and welfare. Elephants are not suited to any form of captivity, as no captivity facility can fulfill the basic biological, social, spatial, cognitive, and intrinsic requirements of elephants. The keeping of elephants in captivity in Canada should be brought to an eventual end, with every effort made to ensure those elephants that remain in captivity are provided with the best possible conditions to meet their welfare requirements and ensure their well-being for the remainder of their lives." End quote. Senator, both of these expert letters are available on the websites of the three committees studying Bill S-241. The second letter responds to arguments made against Bill S-241 by the International Elephant Foundation. This is an organization whose board is largely comprised of zoo executives, including from African Lion Safari. The second expert letter also responds to arguments made against the bill by Elephant Managers Association, also with a board composed of zoo staff. In the second response letter we received from independent experts, I highlight 4 of their conclusions. First, there is not a single case of captive elephants boosting conservation or wild populations through the import of wild elephants required to sustain North American zoos. Second, elephants kept in Canada must spend most of their time indoors in the winter to avoid frostbite and hypothermia. Third, reproductive and other research at African Lion Safari has not had conservation value for wild elephants. And their fourth conclusion, captivity has been shown to cause brain damage on elephants. I trust we will hear from these experts in a committee process. A 2019 New York Times article is also eye-opening. It states, and I quote, "A 2012 Seattle Times investigation found that 390 elephants had died in accredited zoos in the previous 50 years, a majority of them from captivity-related injuries and diseases. Still, the biggest threat by far has proved to be preternaturally low birth rate of captive elephants. One of the more disturbing manifestations of zoo elephant psychosis is the high incidence of stillbirths and reproductive disorders among pregnant mothers. Even when births are successful, there are often instances not only of infant mortality, but also of calf rejection and infanticide, something almost never witnessed in thousands of studies of wild elephant herds. In essence, the trend has been that for every new birth in captivity, 2 elephants have died." End quote. I also note on the record some problematic recent events at African Lion Safari. Like many others, I found it disturbing that in 2021, African Lion Safari offered elephants for sale to a Texas zoo. That transaction, later canceled, would have broken up 2 mother-daughter pairs who normally stay together for life. Elephants named Emily and Nellie were offered for $2 million with a $200,000 bonus if Emily had a calf that lived over 60 days. We can imagine the distress caused by those cruel separations. In addition, in 2019, an elephant attack left a trainer with serious injuries following elephant rides. CBC reported on the incident, and I quote, "Born in Burma, the Asian elephant, Maggie, was ridden for 25 years by visitors to African Lion Safari. But on June 21, 2019, Maggie lunged at her handler as the last rider was dismounting." End quote. Despite everything we know in recent years, elephant performances for entertainment have occurred. You can watch YouTube videos of elephants in a stadium dunking basketballs, painting, standing on their hind legs, kneeling, doing funny walks, shaking their heads, and other circus-style tricks. In addition, some elephant trainers use bull hooks to control their elephants. A bull hook is a sharp baton that gains compliance through pain and fear. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums, that is AZA, announced to phase out of bull hooks in 2019. Around the world, we have seen developments to limit elephant captivity. In 2019, CITES, the International Regulator of Trade in Wildlife, banned sending wild African elephants to zoos. The next year in Pakistan, Justice Arthur Milalha held that animals have constitutional rights and protections under the Quran. He ordered a lone zoo elephant moved to a sanctuary after being held in chains for 35 years. Last year, the lone elephant at the Bronx Zoo, Happy, lost a case for her relocation before the New York Court of Appeals 5-2. Still, she made it that far. Senators, this progress for our fellow creatures reminds me of the words of Martin Luther King, Jr., and I quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." With Bill S-15, Canada can lead the way for elephants, with the first legislated phase-out of their captivity in the world. Like Senator Sinclair, I believe sanctuary options in warmer climates should be considered for Canada's remaining elephants. When it comes to elephant captivity, Senators, we must follow the science. The truth will set them free. I turn now to great apes. First, chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, native to the forests and savannas of tropical Africa. Chimps form lifelong family bonds and friendships. They feel happiness, sadness, fear, despair, and grief. They may greet each other by kissing, and young apes laugh when tickled. In 1960, Dr. Jane Goodell was the first person to observe chimps making and using tools. This prompted the anthropologist Louis Leakey's famous telegram, and I quote, "Now we must redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans." As Senator Sinclair told us, chimpanzees live within complex societies, forming political alliances to achieve their goals. Male chimps even fawn over infants when vying for power. Like humans, chimps can be violent, but they also take care of elderly relatives and grieve their dead. However, humans have treated our closest relatives atrociously. Since 1900, humans have reduced chimpanzee numbers by between 70% and 80%, with numbers still plummeting. In captivity, chimpanzees have been exhibited at roadside zoos and circuses, owned as pets, exploited in TV and films, sent to outer space, and used in military and biomedical research. Experiments on chimps have involved food deprivation, electric shock, surgery, and exposure to radiation, chemical weapons, and diseases. In Canada, six chimpanzees live at Fauna Sanctuary, they could be champions, live at Fauna Sanctuary near Montreal, with 17 others having passed away there over the years, in the relative peace and comfort of sanctuary after lives of devastating trauma. The heroes behind Fauna, led by founder Gloria Grow, rescued these chimps from laboratory research, the entertainment industry, and unsuitable zoos. The best-selling book, The Chimps of Fauna Sanctuary, by Andrew Westall, tells their story. Consider this passage about the death of their beloved chimp, Tom, who was captured from Africa before being sold into laboratory research. Despite what Tom endured, he went on to mentor young males and help Fauna's most damaged chimpanzees to recover. He's remembered as a loving and wise leader. After his death, and I quote, "A small measure of solace might be found in the simple lesson that chimps of Fauna Sanctuary have been teaching Gloria for more than a decade now, that no matter what kind of trauma we've been through, we all have the capacity to recover and help others heal," end quote. Senators, Bill S-15 will allow Fauna to continue their inspiring work with license available for the best interests of chimpanzees in need. I turn now to the gorilla and orangutan conservation and science programs at the Toronto, Calgary, and Granby zoos. Gorillas are the largest primate inhabiting Central Africa. They live in family groups led by a silverback. In the wild, gorillas are critically endangered, with 3 subspecies having lost between 70% and 80% of their population in the last 25 years. Orangutans inhabit the Asian islands of Borneo and Sumatra. Covered in shaggy red fur, they are relatively solitary. However, the relationship between a mother orangutan and her offspring is extremely close, a maternal bond thought to be the most intense of any in nature, with the possible exception of humanity. Orangutans are also critically endangered. 80% of their habitat has been wiped out, and the Sumatran population numbers less than 14% of mid-20th century numbers. The Toronto, Calgary, and Granbury zoos are part of the AZA's Species Survival Plan for gorillas, with a new birth in Calgary this year. As well, the Toronto Zoo is part of such a plan for Sumatran orangutans, with a new birth last year, and 13 orangutans raised since 1974. Operating at the highest standards, these programs aim to manage healthy, genetically diverse, demographically stable population for the long-term future, as a fallback for conservation efforts in the wild to safeguard their existence of the species. In addition, since 2011, the Toronto Zoo has participated in 60 gorilla and orangutan studies with universities, including York University, the University of Toronto, and Laurentian University. Calgary Zoo veterinarians have presented their findings on gorilla medical conditions at veterinary conferences, and last year, Calgary Zoo announced a partnership with two West African conservation organizations, supporting graduate research projects in Nigeria to help save cross-river gorillas, with only 300 remaining. Dr. Jane Goodall supports the continuation of the Toronto, Calgary, and Granbury zoos, interrelated AZA grape ape conservation and science programs, as does Bill S-15. Excellent zoos are helping to save endangered species in Canada and around the world, including great apes, and in doing so, they have my full support. Senators, I turn now to potential amendments to Bill S-15. I understand the government is open to some changes, with the benefit of evidence presented on this bill and Bill S-241. It is fortunate that we will be able to study both bills in tandem, and that as we have the first kick at the can with the S bill starting in the Senate, I guess that's a great thing. With Bill S-15, our task is not sober second thought, it's enthusiastic first thought. As sponsor, I commend the government on their strong record of considering and accepting Senate amendments, including those to save the whale bill, pass the shark fin ban, and phase out animal toxicity testing. Bill S-15 is a milestone to celebrate as the government initiated an animal welfare bill that can achieve the world's first elephant captivity phase-out. However, we may consider an amendment or two to make permanent the elephant ivory and rhino horn regulations announced by Minister Guilbeault this week. Congratulations to the Minister on that achievement to severely restrict trades in elephant ivory, rhino horn, and hunting trophies of those species, with narrow exceptions as antiques. Other topics to consider for an amendment in conjunction with Bill S-15 may include banning elephant rides, authorizing judicial relocation of captive wild animals involved in illegal breeding or performance at sentencings for these offenses with costs, banning big cats at roadside zoos and as pets, exploring the animal care organization framework in Bill S-241 for excellent zoos meeting the highest standards, and providing a mechanism to extend legal protections to additional capital wild species by cabinet decision. At the same time, we need to be mindful that for wildlife captivity legislation, this Parliament, the hour grows late. We must move quickly with two words on our mind: royal assent. Fortunately, with the government procedural features of Bill S-15, the beacons of hope are lit. Colleagues, I turn to my final subject, the process ahead for Bill S-15 and our related but distinct Bill S-241, the Jane Goodall Act. As you know, neither the Whale Captivity Bill nor the Jane Goodall Act have advanced quickly or easily through Parliament. When the Free Willy Bill received the royal assent, it said, I can't wait to get to the end here either. So, when the Free Willy Bill received royal assent in 2019,
keep going.
That event concluded the longest process to pass a bill in Canada's parliamentary history. The bill's 3.5-year journey included 34 months of debate and study in the Senate, compared to 8 months in the House of Commons. The Senate process involved a Hoyce amendment proposing to kill the bill at second reading, 16 committee hearings, 6 months of report stage debate compared to the normal period of several days or weeks, and a filibuster at third reading. The Parliament, Bill S-241, this Parliament, the Bill S-241, the Jane Goodall Act, has been the most debated bill at second reading, with 17 speeches and well over 5 hours of debate prior to our second reading vote in June. Most of those speeches were in strong support of the bill, and I'm grateful to the senators who spoke for our fellow creatures. However, the critic intent entered our debate to oppose the bill after 14 months, and on the condition the bill would be referred to multiple committees. Thus, Bill S-241 became the first non-government bill referred to more than one committee in Parliament's history. And not 2 committees, but 3, the Environment, Legal, and Agriculture committees. On this point, and as a strong supporter of the agriculture sector, I would emphasize that neither Bill S-15 nor Bill S-241 contemplate nor make proposals regarding agriculture. These bills do not contemplate game farms, but pertain to captive wildlife only. However, I welcome all 3 committees' studies and have provided written briefs to each. Unfortunately, the Environment Committee's first 2 meetings to study Bill S-241 have been canceled due to the Senate sitting. Still, I know our chair, Senator Galvez, is eager to be underway. Bill S-15, government procedural features, may finally ensure the wildlife captivity legislation receives a fair, timely, and transparent hearing and a path to royal assent this Parliament. For my part, procedural dynamics with Bill S-241 are water under the bridge. However, I urge this chamber not to tolerate similar dynamics going forward with Bill S-15. We have lost valuable time, and it's imperative that committee hearings begin at the soonest opportunity. I urge senators who wish to speak to this bill to please do so in an expedited basis. Then let's see how far holiday spirit can carry this bill before we break. I trust everyone in this chamber wants to do the right thing for the magnificent creatures with whom we share this earth. I believe that if we follow science and Indigenous knowledge, we can achieve this goal together in Canada, our great nation of nations. I conclude with a quote from my inspiration on this bill, the Honourable Murray Sinclair, and I quote, "I want to remind you that we are all connected, not just you and me, but all life forms of creation. This understanding imposes responsibilities. We live in a time of great challenge with the natural world in peril. However, we also live in a time of great hope with social values increasingly reflecting a moral and spiritual awakening. We can yet save this beautiful planet along with Indigenous cultures and knowledge and the sacred and innocent animals who deserve our compassion," end quote. Senators, I ask for your help in taking a small step towards fulfilling the vision with Bill S-15. Thank you, merci, and haike te tamahin. I'm dizzy.
Senator Martin. L'honorable.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Martin, seconded by the Honourable Senator Poirier, that the adjournment of the debate to the next sitting of the Senate. Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion? Number 2, Bill C-34. Senator Gignac. Honourable Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Gignac, seconded by the Honourable Senator Klein, that this bill be read a second time. On debate, Senator Gignac. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear colleagues, I am pleased to appear before you today as sponsor of Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act. The Investment Canada Act is an important asset for the economy as it provides a clear and predictable regulatory regime to make Canada a major destination for foreign investment. The Act is designed to encourage economic growth and employment and provides for intervention only if an investment would be detrimental to Canada's national security. However, it also provides the government with the necessary powers to act quickly and decisively when necessary. Over the past few years, the government has identified three main themes regarding the need for renewal of the Act: addressing strategic and geopolitical concerns, improving certainty and transparency for investors, and protecting our innovations in Canada.
Canada operates continue to shift rapidly. Hostile state and non-state actors pursue deliberate strategy to acquire goods, technology, and intellectual property. To do so in ways that they are incompatible with Canada's interests and principles. We also know that foreign investment can be used as a conduit for foreign influence activities which seek to weaken our norms and institutions. The nexus between technology and national security is clear and here to stay for the long run. Rapid technological innovation has provided Canada with new opportunity for economic growth, but it has also given rise to new and difficult policy challenges. Dans le même temps que nous devons
At the same time, as we need to support an investment climate that welcomes beneficial investments. This means that ICA activities must be clear, transparent, and efficient. We know that regulatory certainty and timely reviews are important factors in attracting investment to Canada. Canada's foreign investment regime must also adapt to the speed of innovation. Intangible assets, such as intellectual property and data, have become increasingly important in defining Canada's economic strength, and at the same time pose new challenges in terms of how to manage them. Canada is an open economy, rich in natural resources, that is the envy of the world. But Canada is also increasingly the target of hostile actors, and this is a threat to both our national security and our prosperity. That is why the government is taking the necessary steps today to protect the Canadian market by evolving our tools to better defend ourselves against today's threats. We are living in an unprecedented period where foreign investments are undergoing heightened national security scrutiny around the whole world. Reasons include the COVID-19 pandemic, the security implications of climate change, disruptions to global supply chains, and evolving geopolitical considerations. Only by equipping ourselves today against tomorrow's threats will Canada remain an important destination for foreign investment.
It is right to pursue the modernization of the Investment Canada Act. Now more than ever, the government must take concrete action to foster an innovative and healthy economy. The global environment has evolved significantly in recent years, including in global competition, in investment, in technology, and access to critical minerals. This